The story begins with Nicole, a single mother, and her 7-year-old son, Dion. Nicole is running late for work and urges Dion to quickly put his breakfast bowl in the sink. When he picks up the bowl, it slips from his hands, but instead of falling, it floats in midair. Dion stares at the bowl in disbelief, shocked by what he just saw. Later, while driving to school, Dion excitedly tells his mother that he can do magic. She laughs it off, thinking it's just a playful joke, and brushes it aside. She drops him off at school, realizing she's late for work again. The next scene shows Nicole sitting with her friends, looking stressed. She tells them her boss has fired her because she has been arriving late for the past week. Her friends try to comfort her, saying things will get better. Meanwhile, Dion wants to be friends with some kids, but they avoid him. His only friend, Esperanza, encourages him to join the boys at the skate park to bond with them. He follows her advice and heads to the park during school hours. While he's skateboarding, Nicole shows up, furious to find out he skipped class. She drags him home, scolding him along the way. At home, Pat, Dion's godfather and Mark's best friend, is already there. He tells Nicole he promised Dion they would go out for pizza. At the restaurant, Dion asks Pat if he knows what happened to his dad, knowing that Pat and his father are very close. Pat doesn't tell him anything and changes the topic. That night, Dion plays with his toys when something unusual happens. He starts moving them using telekinesis. Nicole freezes in shock as she sees objects floating around the room. Fear takes over, and she yells at Dion to stop. Frightened, Dion panics and loses control of his powers. A lamp flies toward Nicole, but before it can hit her, Dion screams, and everything falls to the floor. Nicole decides to take Dion to the hospital, hoping her sister, Kat, can check on him. After examining Dion, Kat tells Nicole that he is completely healthy. She starts to wonder if Nicole is just imagining things, possibly because of stress or medication. Nicole starts to think that everything she saw might not be real and is just in her mind. Feeling overwhelmed, she takes Dion back home. That night, Nicole decides it's time to tell Dion the truth about his father. She explains that his father died while trying to save a woman who fell into a river. Dion listens quietly, his eyes full of pride as he learns that his dad was a hero. The next day, Nicole takes Dion to a cabin where she and Mark used to spend weekends together. At the lake, they go fishing, but Dion struggles to catch anything. Frustrated, he uses his telekinesis power to lift fish out of the water. When his mom says that fish can't live without water, he lifts up the water. Suddenly, the trees start shaking in their place, and one tree falls, hitting Dion and causing him to fall into the water. His mom quickly pulls him out and takes him back home. Later that night, Dion steps outside and sees many spirits around him. He calls his mother and tells her he can see people in the forest. Confused and scared, she steps outside and sees all the spirits. Among them, she sees Mark. He looks at her with urgency and appears to warn her that it's unsafe there and that they must leave. The next morning, Nicole calls Charlotte, the woman her husband saved the day he died. Nicole finds her number in Mark's jacket pocket, which surprises her since she thought they were strangers. The call goes to voicemail, so Nicole leaves a message asking Charlotte to call back. Before Nicole can think more about it, there's a knock at the door. A policeman stands in front of Nicole, holding a photo, and asks if she recognizes the woman in it. He explains that the woman owns a cabin across the lake and went missing the night before. Her boyfriend says she stepped outside during the storm and never came back. She says she doesn't know anything about the girl, and the police officer leaves. Afterward, Nicole calls Pat to see what he knows about Charlotte, but Pat says he doesn't know her. Feeling suspicious, Nicole shares her theory that Mark might have been cheating on her. Pat tries to calm her down and asks for Charlotte's phone number, but Nicole insists on handling it herself and ends the call. Later, Nicole takes Dion to the lakeside for a yoga lesson, hoping it will help him control his powers. Dion puts in his best effort, but he struggles to stay focused. Suddenly, Dion sees a squirrel running on the ground. He quickly runs after it, but the squirrel climbs up a tree. When Dion tries to catch it, he accidentally teleports onto the tree and gets stuck. Nicole panics and quickly finds a ladder to help him down. A few hours later, she gets a call from Kat, who tells her that she has arranged a job interview for her at the hospital and that she should be there in an hour. Nicole takes Dion along to the interview. While Nicole talks to HR in the interview room, Dion is left alone in Kat's office. She can't focus on the interview, constantly worried about him. When she sees Dion floating with a chair, she panics, runs to him, and takes him away. Seeing Nicole's behavior, Kat feels something is off, so she calls Pat and asks him to keep an eye on Nicole. She also instructs him to make sure Nicole doesn't suspect anything. That afternoon, Pat comes to Nicole to talk about Charlotte. He just wants to know about the person who last spoke to Mark. She tells him to stay away from all of this. While they are talking, Dion, inside the house, sees a girl in a wheelchair who drops her stuffed rabbit on the road. He focuses his power and suddenly teleports right into the middle of the road to grab the toy. Suddenly, a car comes toward him, but Dion quickly teleports again, landing safely in his mother's lap. Pat watches in disbelief, completely stunned and confused by what just happened. That night, Nicole tells Pat they need to find a way for Dion to control his powers. He says that Dion needs something to help him, so Nicole searches through Mark's belongings and finds a watch Mark always carries with him. The next day, Nicole gives Dion his father's watch and explains that it can calm the wearer. She tells him that wearing the watch will help him stay calm and focus. The next day, Dion goes to school, and during break time, a boy named Jonathan asks to borrow Dion's watch to show him a magic trick. Dion, who loves magic tricks, gives the watch to Jonathan. Dion waits eagerly, expecting something amazing, but Jonathan laughs and runs off with the watch. Dion gets angry and uses his powers to pull Jonathan's arm. Just then, the principal appears and takes both boys to his office. Nicole and Dion's class teacher, Mr. Anthony Fry, try to explain to Mr. Campbell that Dion cannot harm anyone. Jonathan also says that Dion did not push him, but Mr. Campbell decides that Dion will be detained after school. Nicole realizes that this is happening because of Dion's skin color. Afterward, she calls Kat and tells her everything. Kat advises Nicole to talk to Dion because it is important for him to learn the truth. Later, Nicole is with her friend Willa, feeling tense about her job. Willa suggests she join dance classes again to help improve her mood. Just then, Nicole gets a call from Charlotte, inviting her to meet at the park. Nicole heads to the park, where she waits for Charlotte. When she arrives, she reveals that she has powers like Dion. She explains that she gained these powers during a trip to Iceland, where everyone present that night was changed forever. She says Mark had these powers too and passed them on to Dion. Nicole is shocked and wonders why Mark never told her. Nicole mentions seeing Mark with others during a storm. Charlotte then explains that a creature in the storm killed Mark and is still hunting. Scared, Charlotte says she needs to hide before the creature finds her and quickly runs away. Later, when Nicole gets home, she tells Pat that Charlotte also has powers like Dion. She then asks why Pat didn't get powers since he was in Iceland with Mark. Pat explains that everyone else got powers because they were outside during the Aurora Borealis, but he was in a tent collecting data. Afterward, Nicole goes to Dion's room and tells him that what Mr. Campbell did at school was because of his skin color and that it will likely happen again in the future. But she reassures him that not everyone is the same, and he just needs to stay away from people like that. Nicole lies on the sofa when a message from Charlotte pops up. She opens it and watches a video of a thunderstorm, her eyes catching a strange creature flashing in the lightning. The next day, Nicole shows Pat the creature's photo and tells him they need to figure out who posted the video. Suddenly, she remembers her neighbor, Malik, who might be able to help. She visits him and asks if he can find out who uploaded the video. Malik agrees to help. In the next scene, we see Dion going to Pat's office because Nicole has 5 job interviews that day. Nicole goes through 5 interviews, but none of them offer her a job. Feeling down, she heads to the dance studio where she has practiced belly dancing for years. When she arrives, she talks to the owner, Quayne, and asks if there's any work available. To her surprise, Quayne offers her the job of ticket sales manager. Meanwhile, Pat takes Dion to Biona, where they meet Suzanne, the CEO of the company. She shares with Dion that she used to work with her father, and then she gives him a tour of the facility. Later, Dion hears a reindeer's voice coming from a large metal door. He tells Pat they should go inside and check it out, but Pat warns him that he doesn't have access and that if they're caught, he'll be fired. Dion uses his mind powers to switch off all the CCTVs and takes Suzanne's access card. When they get inside the lab, they discover that Biona is researching the people who were at the Aurora event. Because of the event, the island's animals were also infected, and they are researching them as well. Dion sees a fox that is injured and in a life-threatening condition, so he heals its wounds. Meanwhile, Pat tampers with the computer, which triggers the alarm. To save Pat, Dion shuts down the entire power supply. As security rushes in, the two manage to escape undetected. On the other side, Nicole meets the girl who posted the thunderstorm video. The girl tells Nicole that she believes some people are trapped in the storm, wanting to escape, but something is holding them back. Later that night, Nicole tells Pat about meeting a girl who mentioned seeing many storms in different places. Nicole thinks they should inform Biona, but Pat explains that Biona already knows and is tracking everyone who was at the Aurora event. In the flashback, we see Pat and Mark at Iceland, where the Aurora event happens. Mark steps out of the tent while Pat stays inside collecting data. Mark asks Pat about the radiation level, and he tells him it's moderate. Mark then checks all the devices to make sure they're working perfectly. After some time, the Aurora event begins, and Pat notices that the radiation level has increased significantly. Pat informs Mark, but he is too caught up in enjoying the event and ignores Pat's warning. In the next scene, Dion and Mark are in the car when, suddenly, Mark's hands begin to turn invisible. Mark panics for a moment, but after a few seconds, his hands become visible again, and he manages to control the car. He arrives home, feeling something strange and realizing that he has developed superpowers. While searching online about this, he finds a post by Charlotte Tuck, which reveals that she was also at the event and experiencing similar phenomena. Later, Mark and Charlotte meet to discuss their powers. Mark says he hasn't told his family about his powers yet because he doesn't want to put them in danger. Charlotte assures him that, with time, he'll learn to control his powers. As Pat and Mark approach the lake, a storm suddenly hits. The strong winds push Charlotte into the water. Mark jumps in to save her, but just as they're almost safe, a huge creature with electric powers grabs Mark. His body begins to break down and is absorbed by the creature. Charlotte manages to escape, but Mark is lost to the creature's power. Back in the present, it's Dion's birthday. Nicole has arranged a birthday party for Dion at a friend's house. Nicole is supposed to take Dion to the party, but just as they're about to leave, Nicole gets a call from Quayne. He tells Nicole that she needs to come to the office immediately, or she might lose her job. Nicole asks her neighbor, Tessa, to take Dion and Esperanza to the birthday party. Without hesitation, Tessa agrees and takes both of them there. After work, Nicole picks up Dion's birthday cake from a bakery and goes straight to the party. After seeing Dion's birthday cake, all his friends start making fun of him. This makes Dion angry, and he storms off. Esperanza goes after him to calm him down, but when she approaches, she sees that Dion is having an asthma attack. She rushes to grab his inhaler from his bag, but the inhaler slips from her hand and goes directly to Dion. Nicole worries that Suzanne might have discovered Dion's powers. The party ends, and Nicole takes Dion and Esperanza home. That night, while Dion is sleeping in his room, Mark appears by his side. As soon as Dion opens his eyes, Mark disappears. When Dion looks out the window through his telescope, he sees the same thunderstorm creature that killed Mark. The next day, Dion tells Nicole he saw the Crooked Man last night. Then, Dion transforms his toy into the Crooked Man. Nicole realizes that Dion actually saw the Lightman the night before. She calls Charlotte and asks her to meet with her. Meanwhile, Pat gets a promotion at work and joins the L5 laboratory investigation team. Suzanne introduces him to specimens collected from Iceland during the Aurora event. She explains that many animals from the area had strange wounds that never healed, causing most of them to die within a few months. However, one fox is different. It was mysteriously healed and no longer shows any changes in its DNA. Suzanne also reveals something alarming. The soil where the fox was found is severely damaged and undergoing necrosis. If they don't figure out what healed the fox, the damage could spread, destroying all of Iceland. Pat is tasked with helping to solve this mystery. Back at home, Charlotte visits Nicole. Nicole begs Charlotte to help Dion learn to control his powers so he can protect himself from the Lightman. In the next scene, Charlotte begins Dion's training. Nicole sits outside when Pat arrives. She doesn't want Pat to see Charlotte, so she asks him to step outside. Pat tells Nicole that Biona has deleted all the data of the people they were tracking. Since Dion healed the fox in the lab, Pat suspects Suzanne might be suspicious of Dion. Meanwhile, Charlotte and Dion continue training. The noise attracts the building owner, and to avoid being seen, they both turn invisible. We then learn that Suzanne has been keeping an eye on them. Later, Nicole and Pat go to a billiards club, where Nicole beats Pat badly. They have a great time together. Later that night, when Pat drops Nicole off at her house, he kisses her. Before Nicole can react, Pat leaves. Nicole goes inside and finds Dion sleeping in his room. She notices Mark's watch and finds a card inside it. When she inserts the card into her laptop, she sees that Mark has saved all the important data, including the names of everyone who was at the Aurora event. The next day, Charlotte goes to Walter's house to meet him but finds out that he passed away a few days earlier. Braden tells Charlotte that an electric man took his father away. Braden is about to share more details when his aunt interrupts and sends him away. However, Braden has powers that allow him to communicate with others through his mind. Using this ability, he contacts Charlotte and asks her to meet him in the garden. In the garden, Braden tells Charlotte that his dad had the power to make plants grow rapidly within seconds. He explains that during a storm one night, a glowing figure appeared and tried to harm them. To protect Braden, Walter used his powers to cover their house with plants, keeping Braden safe. However, Lightman took Walter away. As Charlotte prepares to leave, Braden asks about Dion since Charlotte is thinking about him. She doesn't reveal anything about Dion and leaves. At home, Nicole tells Pat that she found a card in Mark's watch. The card contains important data, but some of it is password protected. Pat suggests taking the files to the office to unlock them, but Nicole refuses, saying she doesn't trust Biona at all. Suddenly, Pat gets a severe migraine, so Nicole places ice on his neck, which gives him some relief. Later, Pat takes Dion to school. While driving, Pat tells Dion that the fox in the lab has fully recovered. Mid-conversation, Pat's headache returns. Dion tries to heal him using his powers, but Pat stops him. While Nicole is at work, she gets a call from Dion's school, informing her that Dion is unwell. Nicole calls her sister asking her to pick up Dion from school and drop him off at home. Kat arrives at the school and notices Dion has a high fever. She decides to take him straight to the hospital and informs Nicole via message. Nicole tries calling to stop her, but Kat doesn't answer. Left with no choice, Nicole calls Pat and explains the situation, asking him to rush to the hospital. Kat takes Dion to the hospital and then conducts a checkup, trying to lower his temperature. However, Dion's temperature continues to rise, so she takes a blood sample and sends it for testing. Dion's condition worsens, and Nicole fears it's due to his powers. Pat worries it's his fault, believing that Dion became sick because he tried to heal his headache earlier. He suggests there might be something in Mark's files that could help cure Dion, but to access them, they would need to involve Biona. Reluctantly, Nicole hands the data to Pat. Meanwhile, Kat tells Nicole that she has sent Dion's blood sample for testing, and the report will be ready soon, but Nicole asks her to bring the sample back. Just then, Kat sees Dion floating in the air, and that's when she realizes the truth about Dion's powers. She understands the gravity of the situation and decides to delete Dion's medical records to avoid future complications. However, doing so could risk her job. Kat takes the risk and begins deleting the files, but Danielle, her colleague, walks in. Kat explains that she's protecting her family and asks Danielle to keep it a secret. Danielle demands the truth, but Kat doesn't reveal anything. Frustrated, Danielle threatens to report her to the board, saying she will be held accountable for any consequences herself. On the other hand, Pat successfully unlocks Mark's files and discovers a cure for Dion's condition. He rushes to the hospital and says an iodine injection will help Dion recover. Kat believes him and gives Dion the injection. Soon after, Dion wakes up, but his powers activate, pushing everyone away. It doesn't last long. Dion calms down, and his fever goes down, bringing relief to everyone. As they prepare to leave the hospital, a group of men in orange jumpsuits arrives and insists on taking Dion to a quarantine zone. Nicole tries to protect Dion, but the police intervene, and Dion is taken away. Nicole storms into the facility, furious and breaking things, demanding to know where her son is. Suzanne steps in and takes her to the office. She explains that Dion has special powers that could stop the destruction caused by the Aurora event in Iceland. She also reveals that after the event, a strange storm started appearing around the world. Suzanne warns that the storm is chasing Dion and trying to kill him, but she assures Nicole that she's doing everything to protect him. Nicole, desperate to save Dion, strikes a deal with Suzanne. She'll give her Mark's data if Suzanne agrees to let Dion go and share information about the storms. Later, Suzanne hands the data to Pat and asks him to analyze it. Pat reveals something unsettling. Dion's powers can fix things, but they're not strong enough for big problems. If Dion tries, it could cost him his life. The next day, Charlotte visits Nicole and shares shocking news. She tells her that Walter also had superpowers. Walter's powers have been passed on to his son, just like Mark's powers were passed to Dion. Charlotte then reveals something even more alarming. The storm killed Walter a few days ago, and now Dion is in serious danger. Hearing this, Nicole's worry for Dion grows even deeper. While Nicole and Charlotte are talking, there's a knock on the door. Nicole opens it to find Pat standing there. He explains that Suzanne gave him the data to study and reassures Nicole that Suzanne isn't doing anything wrong, she's just trying to fix the damage caused by the Aurora event in Iceland. Then, Pat takes Dion to school. That night, Nicole and Charlotte examine the storm and discover that 7 people who were present during the Aurora event have gone missing. Charlotte suggests they need to stay hidden from the storm until they can figure out how to stop it. Nicole asks Charlotte to stay with them to help protect Dion from any danger. The next morning, Pat arrives to pick up Dion for school. Nicole warns Dion that Pat shouldn't know anything about Charlotte. Pat notices 3 dishes on the table, suggesting someone else join them for breakfast. He asks Dion about it, but Dion refuses to tell him anything. Pat starts to feel like Nicole is hiding something from him. Pat goes to Nicole's office to find out the truth and sees her dancing with another man. He assumes that this is the same man who was at her house, and he thinks Nicole is having an affair with him. Dion makes Esperanza float, thinking she'll be impressed, but she gets scared and angry, then leaves the class. When Nicole comes out of her office, Pat is waiting for her. He tells her he loves her and accuses her of taking advantage of his feelings. He demands to know who is with her at breakfast, but Nicole refuses to share. She tells him her life is none of his business. Later, Nicole calls Charlotte to tell her about her argument with Pat. She warns Charlotte not to let Pat meet Dion if he comes by. When Charlotte brings Dion home, Pat shows up at the house. Charlotte stops him outside, but to everyone's surprise, Pat transforms into the Crooked Man and attacks her. Meanwhile, Suzanne calls Nicole to warn her that a storm is near her house and tells her to leave. Nicole refuses, saying Dion is at home. When Nicole finally arrives home, she finds that the Crooked Man has killed Charlotte. The timeline flashes back to Iceland in 2010 during the Aurora event. Solar flares rain down from the sky, and radiation levels spike. Pat warns Mark about the increasing radiation, but the connection between them is lost, leaving Pat unable to contact Mark. Pat decides to step out of the tent. As soon as he steps outside, solar flares strike him directly, severely burning his body. The scene shifts to 2014. Pat is with his girlfriend, Kira, but their relationship is strained. Kira tells Pat that she wants to break up. After saying this, she begins to leave, but Pat tries to stop her. In the struggle, Kira unintentionally injures Pat. This angers Pat, and he kills her in a fit of rage. In the present day, Nicole returns home and takes Dion with her. Pat goes back to the house to look for Nicole and Dion, but he cannot find them. Frustrated, Pat calls Nicole, but she doesn't answer. Meanwhile, Kat is at home when there's a knock on the door. She opens it to find Pat standing there. Pat asks her about Nicole's whereabouts. Sensing Pat's agitated and aggressive behavior, Kat lies to protect herself, saying that Nicole and Dion have gone to St. Louis to stay with her parents. Pat leaves immediately after hearing this. After he leaves, Kat calls Nicole to inform her that Pat has visited and behaved strangely. Nicole says that the Crooked Man came to her house, and now she is taking Dion far away to keep him safe. For Kat's safety, Nicole doesn't reveal her exact location. Nicole and Dion arrive at a cabin. Dion is playing a game when Pat messages him, asking where he is. Unaware of the danger, Dion shares his location. Later, Dion goes to Nicole and tells her that he needs to complete a school project and also wants to talk to Pat. Nicole tries to explain that she and Pat had an argument because Pat wanted a romantic relationship she wasn't interested in. Dion also tells her that he needs to apologize to Esperanza for upsetting her. Dion tries to teleport to Esperanza's location but fails. He then messages her, and she sends him her location. Dion attempts to teleport again. Nicole notices that the storm is approaching but then sees the weather stabilize. Nicole steps outside to check and is surprised to see Pat there. She asks how he found them, and Pat explains that Dion shared his location. As Pat enters the house, Nicole notices scars on his back, similar to the ones she saw on the fox in the lab. She realizes Pat is the Crooked Man. Nicole tries to stop him, but Pat pushes her aside and heads toward Dion. As he reaches Dion, he teleports to his school, but Pat discovers his location. Pat explains to Nicole that the force giving everyone powers is also destroying him from the inside. He says Dion can heal him, just like he healed the fox. Pat admits that he knows the process could kill him, but he will do anything to stay alive. As Pat begins to leave, Nicole attacks him from behind. In response, Pat destroys the entire cabin and leaves, but fortunately, Nicole survives. Nicole calls Suzanne and tells her that Pat is the Crooked Man. She explains that Pat hasn't hurt Dion yet because he believes Dion can heal him. Meanwhile, Dion meets Esperanza and apologizes for scaring her earlier, assuring her he didn't mean to frighten her. At the same time, Pat arrives at the school looking for Dion. He finds him in the project hall and tells him that Nicole sent him to bring Dion home. He refuses, saying he needs to finish his science project and won't leave his friends behind. Pat convinces Dion to speak privately and takes him to an under-construction classroom. There, Pat tells Dion he's dying and that only he can save him. Dion tries to heal Pat, but Nicole arrives just in time and stops him. She tells Dion that Pat is the crooked man and that he's responsible for his father's death. When Dion hears this, he stops healing Pat, and the two of them escape. Pat fully transforms into the crooked man, recognizing the danger, while Nicole locks Dion and his friends in a storage room for their safety. Suzanne arrives and helps Nicole come up with a plan to stop the crooked man. Dion refuses to let his mother face the danger alone and confronts the crooked man but is overpowered. Nicole looks for a metal rod to make a lightning rod. Esperanza realizes the crooked man can only see those with supernatural powers. Just as the crooked man is about to kill Dion, Mark's energy emerges from within the crooked man, weakening him. Nicole uses the metal rod to attack the crooked man and tells Dion to channel his powers into the rod. Dion does, and the crooked man is finally defeated. Mark appears and tells them that energy never truly dies, it only changes form. Dion promises to find a way to bring Mark back. Mark apologizes to Nicole for not telling her the truth earlier and then dematerializes again. In the final scene, Braden kills his aunt, and the crooked man possesses him. That's how Season 1 ends. If you like this video, please share it with your friends and subscribe for more. And don't forget to leave a comment.